I'm going to explain some of the Zoom stuff to you using this presentation. So feel free to follow along in your own version of Chrome, or alternatively you can just watch it on the screen. At this point it's just a passive session where I'm going to be doing some talking for the next 10 minutes. So first of all, the biggest challenge that our guests are probably going to face is just getting onto the Zoom call. So we've all managed by virtue of the fact that we're here, but a lot of people might find this part quite difficult. So you might have to just explain it to them, and this is how they go about getting onto a Zoom call. So they're going to receive a link. They'll get the link in the meeting invite that they're going to get emailed to them, and the link will have two bits of information that are really important to join your Zoom call. So the first thing is the meeting ID, and the second is the meeting password. So they can, of course, just click on the link that is included in the email, and it'll open Zoom in a web browser window, and hopefully it will go, if they've got Zoom installed as the app on their computer, it will try and open it in Zoom, and if not, it will just use the web browser in order to actually connect them to the Zoom call. If they have decided not to click on that link though, if they don't double click the link and they want to go via the manual route, they can open Zoom up on their computer, and they will see a little menu on the left hand side of their Zoom window that has these 4 buttons on it, and the one that they would need to click is the join button. And when they click the join button, they're going to get a little window that is presented to them that says join the meeting, and this is where they take the Zoom meeting ID and copy and paste that into the meeting ID box, and then they click the join button, and at that point it's going to ask them to provide the password that they were given, because we password protect all our meetings to stop random people just getting on the calls, because that tends to be a problem. And once they've gone through the join and they've put in the password, they will probably enter into a waiting room. So we are going to be using waiting rooms so people can't just get into the call, because that way we can prevent unwanted people from jumping into our call and disrupting things. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. So the meeting administrator is probably someone like Taryn or like Mandy today, who are busy monitoring and administering the meeting and allowing people in and out. They are going to confirm that the guests are on some kind of a guest list, and then they're going to let them into the meeting room so that we can have everyone together on the alpha session. When you go into the meeting room, you will see the window that you've been presented with, and in the bottom left-hand corner, there's 2 really important little buttons that you're going to need to know how to use, because this is something that's you're going to be switching on and off a lot during your time in Zoom calls. So the first one is the mute and unmute button. That's probably the most important. That's how we can mute our microphones and unmute them. Once you're on the Zoom call, which is what we've all managed to do by virtue of the fact that we're here, as just to recap, so you'll see in your little Zoom window that pops up on your screen that in the bottom left-hand corner there's a little mute, unmute button, which is important to control your microphone so that you're not putting in background noise and making chewing noises when you're eating a potato chip or whatever, and disrupting the rest of the call, because they really don't need to hear that. But you need to unmute when it's your turn to talk, right? Otherwise no one's going to be able to hear you. And then we have the video control, so you can start and stop your video as well. So that's quite handy for people who maybe don't want to be on video all the time, and perhaps people who have bandwidth limitations. This is something that's going to be important for them, because sending your video does use a lot more bandwidth. So if you've got a capped internet connection, maybe you want to be a bit more sparing about your use of the video. Right, so that's how you get into the Zoom call. So once you're in the Zoom call, as a meeting participant, what do you need to know? What's important? The first thing is your microphone etiquette. So as we've already mentioned, it's good practice for everybody to mute their microphones, and only the people that are talking unmute their microphones. So that way we don't have interruptions and background noises bleeding in from our houses and things behind us. Video etiquette is another thing that's important. So it's nice for people to share their video as much as possible so we can see one another's faces, because that allows us to get an idea of what's going on for each person. Even although we're not in the same physical space as them, at least we can have an idea of what state of mind they're in based on what's going on their facial expressions. Also, if they stick their hand up and they want to talk, that's a nifty way of them drawing your attention. So it's a good practice for your meeting facilitator to be able to control the flow of the conversation. We want to use the chat, so you'll have a look on the little toolbar on the bottom. You'll see there's a chat option, and if you click the chat option, you'll get a little Zoom chat window that pops up. This is a great way of putting your point across when someone else is talking and you don't necessarily want to interrupt them. So we use the chat quite a bit. Yes, Andrew.
Just for those who don't know, if you want that bottom scroll bar to come up, generally the computer, if you just move your mouse or if you just click anywhere on the screen, then that bottom bar will come up with all the chat, the mute, the video, all of that comes up because you won't see it otherwise.
It might hide automatically. That's a great point. So wiggle the mouse and then that bar reappears. When you're in the chat, you can send a chat to everybody. So you choose whether you want to send it to everybody in the group, or you can send a private chat just to one other person in the chat. So you select the person you want the chat to go to. If you are going to do that, just be aware that you might find that you send a private message to somebody, like I might message Andrew something and say thanks for pointing that out, and then if I forget to go back to everyone after I've sent him the message, the next message I type is just going to go to Andrew and no one else is going to see it. So make sure that you switch it back to everyone if that's who you want the chat to go to. And in order to see everyone else's videos, you have the option in the top right-hand corner of your Zoom window to change between speaker view and gallery view. So this is where you can control how many different pictures you have on the screen at once. So either it's going to highlight the person that's doing the talking at that point in time, so that you can see their face big in the front of the screen, and then a few smaller videos around the outside. Or if you want to see everyone on the screen at once, which is usually a preferred way of doing it when you're in a small group setting, you click the gallery view and then you can see what's going on everybody's video at the same time. And no one gets hidden from the side of the screen. So finding your way around Zoom, to add to what Andrew was saying a little bit. So if you wiggle the mouse, when you're in your Zoom view, you'll see that the toolbar pops up from the bottom of the screen, and then you're presented with the different buttons and options and things that you can use to control your call. There is a way on the menu where you can actually tell it to leave the controls on the screen all the time. So if someone's really having a hard time and they can't find stuff, you maybe want to encourage them to do that. So moving through the screen quickly. In the top right-hand corner, this is where we would see our little control that allows us to choose how the videos are going to be presented to us. So this is where we can choose speaker view or gallery view, which is what I was just mentioning. And you can click on it, it'll go back and forth between speaker view and gallery view. That's what we call a toggle. So it will toggle back and forth between the different views each time you click it. Moving down to the bottom left, we can see the microphone control. This is where you can mute and unmute your own microphone, probably the most important thing you're going to have in your small groups to make it conducive and create the right environment for everyone to have a turn. There is a shortcut key in your operating system. So on my Windows machine, it's Alt-A, and I think on the Mac it's a similar variation. It's Command-Alt-A or something like that. And that's how you can use the keyboard to switch your muting on and off for your microphone. So you don't have to click on it with the mouse if you don't want to. Sometimes for those of us that are that way inclined, it's easier to just use the keyboard. Next to that, we have our video control. So on the video control, you can choose whether you're switching your video on and off. If the video is causing you bandwidth issues, or you're not feeling camera ready, you can switch your video off, and then at the appropriate time when you wanted to raise your hand or show your face to the rest of the group, you can turn the video back on again. We're going to encourage our participants to keep their video on as much as possible. Next to that, in the middle, we have our participants button. So if we click on the participants button, we get to see a list of all the other people that are on the call with us. This is a nice way of keeping track of who your fellow guests are. Sometimes the names may not be showing on the screen because you might have too many videos. Certainly when we're in the large alpha session at the beginning of the evening, we definitely won't be able to see everybody's videos on the screen. So this is where you can find people if you're looking for someone in particular under the participants window. You can also use the participants window to put up a virtual hand. So if your video is not on and you still would like to say something, there's a little raise hand button as part of the participants thing, and that signals the facilitator that you would like to say something. Moving on, next to that we have the chat. So we've already mentioned the chat. The chat is a great feature and a nice way of raising points in an unobtrusive way. So if you wanted to put a point across, or there's someone's got their microphone on mute and you wanted to just let them know, you can pop a little note in the chat and it won't disrupt whatever the person is speaking, who's speaking is saying. So that's a nice way of creating a secondary channel. On the downside, if you have a whole separate side chat going on whilst someone's talking, it can be a bit distracting. So you're going to have to use your discretion in terms of how much you use the chat and for what purpose. Okay. So that's finding your way around Zoom. So now we move on to the slightly more advanced stuff, and this is for the people that are going to be the meeting administrators. So these are the people that are going to be controlling the flow of your Zoom meeting for the night. So this is typically someone like Taryn or Mandy tonight. They're fulfilling the role of host, and they are going to let people in from the waiting room. They are going to also set up breakout rooms. So if we're going to move into our small groups, we're going to need breakout rooms, and the participants of the call will have an opportunity to break out into smaller little subgroups and go and spend some time in your small groups. And then when your allocated time for discussion is up, you'll move back into the main session again. Okay, so breakout rooms, the administrator can set it up. So if you have a look what I've shown here on the right hand side, when the administrator clicks the breakout room, they can create the breakout rooms. There's an automatic or a manual mode. They probably want to create the manual breakout groups and assign people to the groups. Okay, so the administrator can control who goes into which breakout room. They can also decide when they want to open the breakout rooms and close the breakout rooms. And you have a look here. Here's some of the options that they get presented with when they're busy configuring the breakout rooms or setting them up. They can decide whether they're going to allow the participants to leave the breakout rooms and go back to the main room whenever they want to. You may not necessarily want to do this. In fact, if you're in your small groups, it's probably a bad idea to allow people to just get out of the breakout room themselves. You can also close the breakout rooms automatically. So you could set up a timer that says, okay, we're going to allow people 90 minutes in their small groups or 60 minutes in their small groups. And so when you open the breakout rooms, you can set that 60 minutes up front, and then after 60 minutes, the rooms will automatically close and people will come back to the main meeting. You can set a countdown timer after closing the breakout room. So this is a courteous thing to do. If you switch that on, you can say how many seconds the warning the participants get before their room closes, and they get kicked out automatically. If you don't set this, it's a hard kick and they just get booted out of the call mid-sentence and they're back in the main room. So that might be a little bit hectic for your participants. So managing your participants, you can manage as the administrator the microphones and video of your participants. So you can switch the video and the microphones on and off if you're one of the hosts. Sometimes this is handy if someone forgot to mute their microphone and there's a lot of background noise coming through, or maybe there's a big echo on the call because their microphone and their speakers are too close to one another and their computer's not set up to suppress the echo happening. So then you can mute the person for them without them having to do it themselves. This is quite handy if your participants are not that familiar with Zoom. As the hosts of the evening, one thing you want to do is create conversational flow. So you want to make sure that people can have a good conversation and try and let the technology fade into the background as much as possible. This is probably going to be a bit difficult to start with in the early days, and people are going to be very bothered by what's going on the screen and clicking all the buttons and how they move in and out of the rooms and that sort of thing. But you'll find quite quickly within probably a few minutes or hours that people actually get used to how Zoom works, and then they can start to really relax and have a good conversation with each other in the call. And also, as the meeting administrator, you want to encourage people to use the chat at the appropriate times, and you want to keep an eye on what's going on the chat as well. So if someone's raising a point, or if one of your team members wants to let everybody else know something, you might want to keep an eye out, put it on the chat, keep an eye on that, and then at the right time, and when there's a break in conversation, you can bring up that point for everybody. There's some other things you can do as the administrator. So if you have someone on the call that's misbehaving, so let's move on to the next slide, slide number 8. You can switch on some security features so that people can't do dodgy stuff and put up inappropriate content and start saying inappropriate things. So that does happen on Zoom sometimes. You get Zoom bombers who jump in on the call with the sole purpose of wanting to disrupt the meeting that you're having. And they might start swearing uncontrollably, or maybe they just hog the conversation and don't let anyone else speak. Or perhaps they share their screen and they show some pornographic pictures on the screen or something dodgy that no one else wants to look at. You can actually kick them off altogether, right? So first thing you want to do is switch off sharing of the screen as the administrator. You want to decide whether you're going to allow people to rename themselves or not. Usually we would probably encourage you not to. And if you do find someone who's trolling you, in other words, they're behaving in an inappropriate way and they're just there to disrupt the session, as the administrator, you can either put them back in the waiting room, so that's like putting them in timeout, and see if they behave themselves. You might decide to let them back in again if it's something not too bad. And if they have Tourette's syndrome and they start swearing uncontrollably, you probably want to just remove them altogether, right? So then you click the remove button, and in fact, when you do that, you can choose whether you ban the person so they can't come back into the room again. Sometimes you might find that that person finds their way back into the room, and the best option then is to kick them out and lock the meeting so no one else can join it. So there's upsides and downsides to locking the meeting. Once the meeting's locked, only the people that are in the meeting can stay there. No one else. If you accidentally get dropped out of the call, you can't come back again. So you would then need to WhatsApp your group leader and say, help, I'm stuck, I'm outside of the group, and the administrator would have to unlock the room for a couple of minutes, let you back in, and then they can lock it again. Hopefully we won't have a problem with this and we won't need to use it, but just so you know, this is the facilities that you have at your disposal.